and welcome back to We the People. How one big bill could change America's financial future. So, as you all know, or for those that are joining us just now, I am joined by Joseph Reyes, owner and founder of J.L. Reyes Accounting and Tax CPAs in the great state of Pennsylvania. So, Joe, you, I'm sure, like many of us, have been watching the news and are seeing the proposals for this one big, beautiful bill. I wish I could do a Trump impersonation on that, that aim to fix a lot of our country's financial problems in one shot. So I'm just curious, what's standing out most about this for you and for those that are in your industry?
Well, for me personally, I know that the House passed their version of the bill, and then it went to the Senate, and the Senate is saying maybe, maybe not, right? So,
Mhm.
and then whatever they do is going to be sent back to the House, and they're going to hopefully not go back and forth. So, whatever we're hearing today, I take the news with a grain of salt. What you hear today is not what the reality is going to be tomorrow. So, the things that stick out in my head, to be honest, is like the small stuff like no tax on tips,
Mhm.
um, no tax on overtime. Uh, my favorite, because I'm a senior, no tax on Social Security benefits, right? Because Social Security benefits, there was a day pre-Biden, no, but when Biden and Reagan were in power, they started taxing Social Security benefits, if I recall correctly.
Mhm.
And they're looking to do away with that. But the big question then becomes, that's a lot of lost revenue for the federal government, and how are they going to get passed? Because it's going to be, in my opinion, it's going to be challenged in the courts how you can treat one type of income differently than you treat another type of income, because believe it or not, rich people have as much due to equality, just like poor people, if you will, or lower income people. So I just don't see it, and I see the some conservative Republicans who are saying we're just going to be adding to our debt. So, something dramatic has to happen now. I think what the Trump administration is thinking is that they're going to grow the economy, and
Mhm.
so we shouldn't have to worry too much about reducing the debt. And I think I'm online with that, right? So, other than that, everything else that's in the bill, I'm not paying a whole lot of attention until the Senate is done with what they're doing. Once the Senate makes a decision, then I
Mhm.
think we're going to see, okay, we're on track here. We got agreement between the House and the Senate. All right, so we know probably what's going to happen, and then that's when it's going to get really interesting. And then, of course, the tax cuts that are going to go away in 26, that's going to be a major deal. And I'm anxious to see what happens with that, because all these tax changes, it just kills us accountants who have to deal with learning and training and implementation and all that. And then we do a lot of tax planning for clients, and so then we just have to shift gears. There's so much that goes into being a good tax planning CPA. So that's my take on it.
Well, and I love that you mentioned it because it's interesting. And I mean, of course, keeping up with the news and even watching just average people's reactions to this, like
Mhm.
the no tax on tips. And it was a big campaign promise from both
Right.
sides, from both Harris and
Right.
Trump.
Right.
I mean, so there was actually agreement. And I know it's amazing
Right.
on that, but I see that like in looking at and I find it interesting. Someone mentioned like, okay, so I have two jobs. I'm getting taxed on my salary. Why should I be then expected to pay tips? And I think it's some people always have this idea that the person who is on the tips is the individual who, and I'm not throwing shade on anything like, but like Denny's waitresses or someone who may be lower income.
Right.
But if you're in an area like I live in Southwest Florida, where I know during season, people that are bartending and serving are making $500 plus a night. So I know that they were looking at maybe capping the amount. And I think that's fair. Um, so I'm going to have to ask a question. And I don't know how you're going to take it because it's totally not on the
Okay.
script.
Okay.
Some people try to float the idea, well, maybe the tax code with its complexities, it would be best to just go to a flat tax rate and everybody just pays a certain percentage of their income. What are your thoughts on that?
So I have a two-sided opinion on that. I'm a tax planner. So I like the complexity because if it's complex, guess what I get to do? I get to do high level tax work and earn a great living doing that. On the other hand, the flat tax sounds great. It just simplifies what tax everybody's going to pay. But like I said earlier in another segment, that the tax code is set up to do some social engineering, right? So, for instance, if we want the United States to go more solar, then you want to entice people to invest in solar power, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't do that, the chances of moving the needle more towards solar is minimalized, right? So I don't think the United States culturally and politically is is anywhere near mindset of going to a flat tax. What would be better, in my opinion, is reducing all these other taxes that we're paying. Something has got to give, right? So we earn a living, we pay taxes. The after tax money, we go to the store, we buy something, we pay taxes on that. We get
Mm-hmm.
paid more tax, more tax. So maybe simplifying the entire tax structure, including the income tax versus the sales tax and all the other taxes, might be a miracle to make happen. But good luck with that.
Well, and I'm somewhat chuckling because I think it was Forbes when he was, God, I can't remember. I think he was the first one to really float this because he was trying to run for president, and this was eons ago. And it seems to always kind of come back, like, oh, flat
Right.
tax, but it's true, it's the social engineering, but also it's the effect on lower income people that would have that, it would take a toll on that. And then I look at countries like Russia because they did a flat tax, and then that really hasn't brought in it hasn't generated the amount enough capital to run a country of that size. And we are definitely have a very large bill, if you will, federally to run
Right.
this
Right.
country. So and I had to pop that in because I'm like, I never had the guts to ask an accountant.
Yeah, yeah, it's you'll put it all over accountants out of business, and not to mention IRS agents, so maybe at least 1 million or 2 million people, So imagine being the president of the United States floating that idea, during the campaign time. So it's so complex, but we're so deep into the IRS code, and people have made decisions and investments and moves based upon a tax code that was in existence that can affect them for years to come. And then you switch it up, and you have contracts that are going to be affected. It's just so embedded into our culture and our economy. I don't see a flat tax happening unless some kind of miracle occurs.
And I don't think so either. And the reason I think is just like you said, first of all, whether that would generate enough income, because the reality is our personal income taxes that we are putting into the government doesn't even cover the budget. And there
Right,
are so many things. And I liked how what you stated. How about giving either eliminating other special taxes, because it's true, we're taxed on our income, we're taxed on our property, we're taxed on goods that we purchase. I think it was Warren Buffett back in the late 90s, early 2000 even said, well, you could eliminate income tax if you just did a general sales tax, like a
right,
national
right,
sales tax. But it's like, I'm in Florida. I know I'm already paying 6.5, 7%.
right. Yeah, and just imagine, right? You have red states and blue states that
Mm-hmm.
don't like each other, right? So just imagine getting two states that are politically opposed to each other agreeing on something like that, right? So um, that's a tall task, but that would be nice if we can get there. But yeah, I'm not seeing it.
I don't either, but I had to post that
Yeah,
question
it's
because,
a good question, So,
well, thank you for taking that on, Joe, because really that has like been one of those burning questions for years. I've been like, so what do you think about this? So why not do it on national television?
sure, piece of cake.
Okay. So, Joe, considering the political climate we are in, and I'm of the belief that obviously the media and I believe the politicians really stoke this false image that we're more opposed to each other than in reality. I think 70%, if not more of us, have much more in common. How do you deal with you're in Pennsylvania, you're outside of Philadelphia. You're dealing with a lot of international and out of state people that are also have businesses and property in Pennsylvania. How do you juggle, for lack of a better word, for them, their tax implications that they may have in the United States versus maybe in another state that they may also reside in or have properties in?
So even though I'm just outside of Philadelphia, I have clientele all over the country. So we're a paperless, electronically, technically savvy company, right? So, and we get referrals from all over the place, and we have businesses that we deal with and whatnot. So, when we look at taxes from the federal level, right? It's basically the same thing for every state. It doesn't really matter if you have property in Pennsylvania or New Jersey, right? So it's just when you do tax planning, for instance, you want to take into consideration the impact on on the person's state tax. But from a federal level, it doesn't really matter to us, what state you live in. You have a business, we know what to do with the business. We know how it flows to the, personal. One thing we recommend for all business owners and for whoever can afford it is having an irrevocable trust, right? So that
Mm-hmm.
you're creating an estate and a estate planning mechanism for yourself, asset protection, things of that nature. But every state is different. You can have a trust set up one way in Texas, whereas Pennsylvania law does not allow that, right? So that's where, the state laws come into play and can really impact you. But as far as the prep and the planning on the federal side, the strategies that we employ for our high net worth individuals, for instance, are we just hit it out of the ballpark, and it doesn't really matter. We've been doing stuff for New Jersey and Pennsylvania residents in particular that are high end, and we've been able to save both of those states' citizens tons of money because of the federal tax law that we can employ and take advantage of.
See, and I love that you just stated not only are you helping the great citizens of Pennsylvania and New Jersey, but you are actually, and you are national wide. So
Right.
for our viewers, first of all, thank you, Joe, so much.
You're welcome.
And you hit upon something I'm hoping that you'll come back on and we can talk about trusts and taxing because that's actually
Hmm.
my playing field as well. Um,
Oh,
but for our audience, reach out to Joe at JL Reyes Accounting and Tax CPAs. They deal with all states as federal taxes. They can guide you expertly. This Joe himself has been doing this for, I'm going to just say, for a little bit, uh,
mhm,
for a
mhm.
while. And
I'm
you can
getting up
reach him
there.
at 215-525-2976. And of course, go to nowmedia.com where we will have his contact information. Joe, thank you again for being a guest on my show. And for those of you, we're going to take a quick commercial break. Stay tuned for more on We the People.
Thank you.